In a single night, Russia lost something it never wanted to lose before a parade. Something that cannot be bought back with money, Kalibr missiles or the Buk M3. And the Kremlin has 36 hours before Putin descends the steps on Red Square to answer a very uncomfortable question. How were Ukrainian drones, which cost less per unit than a used mid-range car, able to simultaneously take out a Corvette in Dagestan, one of northern Russia's largest refineries, and the air traffic control center for 13 airports? In the next few minutes on Military Outlook, we'll show why this strike wasn't a fluke, why it's already jeopardizing Russia's summer offensive before it even begins, and why a $55,000 drone from a workshop near Kyiv is turning the world's most expensive air defense systems into a laughingstock. What you'll see in this episode isn't just a drone attack. It is the birth of a new form of warfare, one in which numbers and software defeat hardware. Let's start with what happened on the night of May 7, 2026. According to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, FP-1 drones manufactured by the Kyiv-based company Firepoint struck a small Project 22,800 class Karakurt missile ship at the Caspian base in Dagestan. This corvette can carry 8 Kalibr cruise missiles, exactly the missiles Russia has been using for months to strike Ukrainian residential buildings, hospitals, and energy facilities. Caspian is located more than 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian-controlled line. Until now, Russian naval planners had regarded the Caspian Fleet as a secure rear area. That assumption last night was wiped out. To understand the situation, one must briefly recall what happened just 4 days earlier. On May 3rd, Ukrainian Special Forces struck another Karakurt-class corvette in the port of Primorsk on the Baltic Sea. According to Euromaidan Press, this corvette had its full complement of 8 Kalibr cruise missiles on board when it was struck. 8 Kalibrs, that's not just a ship on fire. Those are 8 cruise missiles that will never again strike Kyiv, Kharkiv, or Lviv. Within 4 days, Ukraine has taken out 2 Karakurt-class corvettes in 2 different seas, the Baltic Sea and the Caspian Sea. That's a geographical span of about 2,500 kilometers. Not a single NATO navy except the U.S. Navy can demonstrate such a range in a single weekend. And Ukraine doesn't have a navy. It has a drone factory. And that was just Act 1. Act 2 came on the night of May 8th. Russia's Ministry of Defense itself admitted that 264 Ukrainian drones had been intercepted over Russian territory. That is the number Moscow concedes, and it is already higher than any drone attack Russia has ever admitted to before. Ukrainian sources speak of up to 300 drones launched in waves from at least 4 different directions. The targets read like a strategic shopping list: Yaroslavl, Moscow, Rostov-on-Don, Perm in the Urals, and Grozny in Chechnya. 5 regions more than 4,000 kilometers apart struck simultaneously. This is not improvised. This is orchestrated. The Slavneft Yanos refinery in Yaroslavl, about 700 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, suffered the heaviest blow. According to the Ukrainian drone unit, the Unmanned Systems Forces, this facility processes around 15 million tons of crude oil per year. It is one of the largest refineries in northern Russia. Gas, oil, jet fuel, diesel fuel for tanks and trucks. All of that comes from there. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated in a statement that this was a facility of great importance for financing the Russian war. We call it a long-range sanction, he said, and we are doing this because Russia only responds under pressure. In Rostov-on-Don, a drone struck the administrative building of Aeronavigatsiya, the air traffic control agency for southern Russia. The result, according to the Moscow Times, 13 airports had to suspend operations. Astrakhan, Volgograd, Krasnodar, Sochi, Stavropol, Mineralny Vody, and 9 others. In Moscow itself, Vnukovo and Domodedovo were closed, hundreds of flights were cancelled, and about 14,000 passengers were stranded of all times 36 hours before the parade, to which Putin had invited foreign dignitaries. Aeroflot, Pobeda Nordwind, and Rossiya had to rewrite their flight schedules overnight. Imagine that for a moment, a single drone, a single piece of hardware, paralyzed air traffic across an area the size of France for a day. But that's just the beginning. Now for the truly crucial question. How could this happen? Russia possesses Buk M3 Pantsir S-1 Tor M2 Tor M2 DT Strela 10, the Neobai radar, the Kosta 2E2 radar, one of the densest air defense architectures in the world. According to Ukrainian intelligence, each Buk M3 system costs up to $50 million. A Pantsir S-1 costs between $15 and $20 million. A Tor M2 about $25 million. And on the other side is a drone that, according to the Wikipedia entry for Firepoint, costs around $55,000 per unit. The math is brutal. If Ukraine takes out a single Buk M3 with 10 FP1s, that is $500,000, it has achieved a cost ratio of about 100 to 1. Even if 9 out of 10 drones are shot down, the Ukrainian side still wins the exchange ratio. Russia cannot mass-produce 100 Buk M3s, while Ukraine can mass-produce 10,000 FP1s. This is exactly where the whole system breaks down. Let's take a closer look, because this is where things get serious. The first scenario concerns the drone itself, the FP1. It has a range of up to 1,600 kilometers, a modular warhead, weighing between 60 and 120 kilograms, and is now being produced at a rate of over 100 drones per day. This is reported by the Ukrainian defense tech cluster, Brave One. According to the Drone XL platform, Firepoint has developed 7 generations of navigation systems in 36 months. 7. The current generation operates entirely without GPS. It uses an image recognition map, a cheap night vision camera, compares the landscape beneath the drone with a stored terrain map. Russia can jam GPS. Russia can spoof GPS. But Russia cannot jam a drone that doesn't need GPS. That is the first nail in the coffin for Russian airspace. The significance of this pace can hardly be overstated. 7 generations in 3.5 years, that is an innovation cycle that no Western defense contractor, let alone Rosoboronexport, has ever achieved. While Lockheed Martin or Rheinmetall typically need 10 years for a single-generation Firepoint cycles through its updates, like a software company. 3 weeks of testing, 3 weeks of adaptation, a new iteration in the air. The second scenario concerns what the industry calls machine vision, computer vision, in the final phase of the approach. According to a detailed report by Ukraine's Arms Monitor, more than 100 companies in Ukraine are now working on FPV drones with image recognition. The principle is simple and deadly. The operator selects the target, say a Buk M3 in a wooded area. The drone stores the target's silhouette, locks onto it, and flies toward it, even if the radio connection is completely lost in the final 500 meters. This means Russia's electronic warfare, the EW systems, that Moscow has touted as a trump card for years, become useless at the very moment they are supposed to take effect. And this is precisely where the dramatic difference between the two camps becomes apparent. Russia has responded to the problem of electronic jamming with drones that tow a fiber optic cable up to 20 kilometers long, physically connected to the operator, because no radio link is secure. These drones work, but they have a maximum range limited by the cable, and they are literally on a leash. Ukraine has solved the opposite problem in the opposite way: no leash, but software. While Russian operators monitor a fiber optic cable on a laptop, a Ukrainian algorithm locks onto a Buk silhouette and completes the approach on its own. That is the difference between an industry still thinking in the second half of the 20th century and one fighting in the 21st. Russia's own generals know this. According to a May 8th report by Euromaidan Press, Moscow is now deploying an additional 4 regiments, 24 battalions, and 162 batteries solely to protect the capital from Ukrainian drones. 4 additional regiments to fend off drones that cost as much per unit as a mid-range VW. It is a bitter acknowledgement that the old system is breaking down, and it costs twice as much. Every Buk M3 battery now stationed in Moscow is missing from the front lines. Every panzer now guarding a Kremlin tower can no longer protect an ammunition depot. Ukraine has forced Russia into a defensive spiral in which every defensive move devours offensive resources. But before we get to the third scenario, a quick reminder: if you like these military situation analyses, subscribe to Military Outlook. Here you'll get the full picture, not just the headlines, and you won't miss any of our weekly in-depth analyses. Turn on the bell icon and stay up to date. The third scenario, and this is where the blow becomes truly strategic, concerns the Caspian Fleet. For years, this fleet was considered the safe haven for Russia's Kalibr carriers. According to Militarny, 2 Karakurt-class corvettes were permanently stationed in the Caspian Sea as of February 2026, the Tucha and the Typhoon. A third, the Amur, was transferred to the Baltic Sea via the Volga-Don Canal in October 2025. The logic behind this was simple. If Sevastopol is unsafe, the Karakurts fly to Kaspisk. From there, with the Kalibr's range of about 2,500 kilometers, any Ukrainian urban area can be struck without Ukraine being able to strike back. It is precisely this assumption that has now been shattered. If Ukraine can hit a Karakurt in Kaspisk, it can hit them all. The moment the FP-1 struck in Dagestan, Russia lost an entire pillar of its naval doctrine, and that has consequences far beyond the Black Sea region. Russia's entire naval strategy is based on the concept of sanctuary ports, that is, ports where ships can be safely refueled, re-equipped, and prepared. Sevastopol is no longer one. Novorossiysk is barely one anymore. Primorsk has been under fire since May 3rd, and now Kaspisk is out of the picture as well. Where is Russia supposed to send its Kalibr carriers? To the Black Sea, to the Sea of Azov, to the Pacific Ocean, where they can no longer reach any Ukrainian city? Every answer costs Russia operational range. The fourth scenario concerns energy infrastructure. This is the part that hits the Kremlin hardest, because it hits the coffers. The Slavneft Yanos refinery is not the first to go up in flames. According to Al Jazeera, several Russian refineries have been repeatedly struck since March 2026. The Tuapse facility on the Black Sea has been hit 4 times. The Lukoil Permnefteorg's Intez refinery in Perm was struck for the 3rd time in just 9 days on May 8th, according to UA Wire. This refinery processes 13 million tons of crude oil per year. If Ukraine systematically destroys the AVT units, the first processing stages of the refineries, then Russia, despite all its reserve tanks and pipelines, cannot change one simple fact. Without refined diesel, no tanks roll. Without jet fuel, no Su-34 takes off. And without tax revenue from oil exports, there are no new T-90Ms at the front. About 1/3 of Russia's federal budget depends on oil and gas revenues. If 3 or 4 refineries stop operating simultaneously for weeks on end, not only will the front lines collapse, pensions in Siberia will also shrink. Hospitals in Volgograd won't receive supplies either. Private consumption will also shrink. Zelensky calls them long-range sanctions. For a reason, it is an economic blockade carried out with warheads. Russia's response to all this, on May 4th, Putin announced a unilateral ceasefire for May 8th to 10th timed to coincide with the parade. Zelensky rejected it. In a speech, he said Russia only wanted a break to march unchallenged across Red Square for 1 hour a year and then continue killing. According to Al Jazeera, the Ukrainian military recorded 850 Russian drone attacks and 140 attacks on frontline positions in the first 7 hours after the alleged ceasefire began. So there was no ceasefire. There was only a PR backdrop for foreign dignitaries and a Ukrainian drone storm that shattered that very backdrop. And while the drones were flying, things were also getting politically tight in Moscow. According to Euromaidan Press, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico was the only EU head of government to travel to Moscow at all on May 9th. France kept its embassy in Kyiv open as a demonstrative response to Russia's threat to target decision-making centers should the parade be disrupted. Other Western nations stated they saw no reason to attend an event that had become in every respect a stage for Putin's war. Even the Kremlin admitted, according to Pravda, that it had not actually invited any foreign dignitaries, some had simply come anyway. In other words, Russia is celebrating its most important holiday, practically alone, before empty stands, with closed airports, and a navy burning in 3 seas. And at the same time, Russia continued to attack Ukrainian civilians. In Sumy and Zaporizhzhia, Iskander debris struck residential areas. According to Ukrainian emergency services, a kindergarten was among the targets. In Kramatorsk, cars were burning after a nighttime attack. This is the other side of the picture that Moscow does not show in its state media. While Ukraine targets refineries and corvettes, Russia fires on playgrounds. The difference in targeting could not be greater. Ukraine bombs fuel. Russia bombs families. And it is precisely this contrast that should silence any European skeptic who still speaks of a morally balanced conflict. What does this mean for Russia? It means, in short, a catastrophe. Putin's summer offensive, which Western analysts say was set to begin in late May or early June, rests on 3 pillars: fuel, ammunition, and air superiority. All 3 were struck simultaneously on the night of May 8th. The Yaroslavl refinery supplies troops, the Karakurts supply the Kalibr stockpile, and the Niobe and Kosta 2E2 radars. The very radars meant to detect drones have already been taken out in several sectors, according to Militarny. Russia's generals face a simple choice. Either they pull Buk and Pantsir systems off the front lines to protect Moscow, thereby weakening the offensive, or they leave Moscow vulnerable, and the Kremlin will be humiliated anew every night the drones strike. Either way, they lose, and it gets even worse. According to a report in the Vocal Media Journal, Ukraine manufactured more than 4 million domestically produced drones of all classes in 2025 alone. 4 million. That's not a one-off batch. That's the new industrial reality Russia is fighting against. And on the other hand, Moscow must realize that every destroyed Buk M3 cannot realistically be replaced, according to public estimates. The Russian military industry produces just a low double-digit number per year, while Ukrainian drones are said to have already damaged or destroyed half of the Panzer fleet. That is industrialization versus craftsmanship. That is scale versus piecework. And it is the real reason why the mathematics of war are inexorably tipping in one direction. And this is precisely where the picture grows even bleaker for the Kremlin. While Russia is stationing 4 additional regiments for drone defense in Moscow, Ukraine isn't even sending its soldiers onto the most dangerous routes in the first place. According to the Modern War Institute, Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade now handles 80% of its logistics using unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs. In the battleground cities of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd, the figure is as high as 90%. Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov stated on April 18th that the Ukrainian military had completed 9,000 missions with ground robots in March alone. According to the Jerusalem Post, Kyiv has signed contracts for 25,000 UGVs for the first half of 2026, twice as many as in the entire previous year. The logic is cold and compelling. If a robot is destroyed, Ukraine loses equipment. If 3 soldiers are killed, Ukraine loses 3 families. On the Russian side, the situation is different. Russia sends its assault troops on foot across open fields near Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar, often without adequate drone defense, often with old BMP-1s, often on motorcycles. Anyone who looks up Russian losses in open sources is confronted with numbers that are beyond any Western imagination. The Ukrainian General Staff puts Russian losses between February 2022 and May 8, 2026, at around 1.34 million soldiers killed, seriously wounded, or captured. Even if this figure is disputed and Western estimates are lower, the sheer scale of it alone is an admission of Russian doctrine: man replaces technology. While Kyiv is automating its operations, Moscow is still sending waves of flesh and blood against machine guns. That is not strength. That is the mathematics of desperation. And while drones flew over Russia, the Ukrainian ground front was by no means passive. In the south, in the Zaporizhzhia region, Ukrainian sources report local advances in the sectors around Mala Tokmachka and Stepnohirsk, small tactical movements, but movements in the right direction. They show that Ukraine is not only striking deep in the rear, but is also keeping the front active and regaining ground in isolated pockets. Russia must therefore simultaneously defend Moscow, protect refineries, replace Karakurts, and on top of that, hold a front that is beginning to shift in the south. That is a burden that would tear apart any general staff in the world. Russia fights with numbers. Ukraine fights with math. Russia fights with orders from the Kremlin that send soldiers into open fields. Ukraine fights with decentralized operators who control a $20,000 robot from 50 kilometers away using Starlink terminals. Russia relies on $50 million book systems. Ukraine relies on $55,000 FP1s. These aren't 2 different strategies. These are 2 different centuries colliding. And there is no doubt which century will win. And that is the reality Moscow is waking up to tonight. Putin's parade is taking place, but according to Zelensky, for the first time in years, without military equipment on Red Square, because the Kremlin simply cannot afford a display of force. A parade without tanks. A victory celebration whose airports have been closed. A navy whose most modern corvettes are burning in more and more ports. A general staff pulling regiments off the front lines just to protect the capital. An economy whose refineries are engulfed in a series of fires that no one can put out anymore. And all of this because a few engineers in Kyiv decided 3.5 years ago that the best way to fight a richer enemy is not to copy it, but to render it obsolete. The real question that remains now is not whether Russia will strike back. It will strike back with Iskanders, with Shaheds, with cruise missiles on residential neighborhoods. The real question is what happens if Ukraine scales up this drone campaign to the next level this summer. If 264 drones per night become 500, from 500 to 1,000. When the Flamingo cruise missiles, which according to Zelensky went into mass production by the end of 2025, launch alongside the FP1S, and when machine vision algorithms from Kyiv workshops determine the fate of Russian industrial cities, one refinery after another, one Karakurt after another, one airport after another. What we are seeing right now is not the end of the escalation. It is only the trial run. This is the situation Moscow is waking up to today. If you don't want to miss any of this, subscribe to Military Outlook and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next episode.